The mahogany conference room felt like a tomb. Jasmine sat in the corner chair, her hands folded tight in her lap, watching as 30 pairs of eyes stared at her with barely hidden disgust. She could feel their judgment burning into her skin like acid. The whispers had started the moment she walked through the glass doors of Peterson and Associates law firm. "What is she doing here?" someone had hissed. "The nerve of that woman," another voice had muttered. "After what she did to poor Richard, showing up to his will reading like she has any right." Jasmine kept her chin up, but inside her heart was breaking all over again. These people, Richard's family, his business partners, his so-called friends, they all believed the lies. They all thought she was the villain in this story. They thought she had destroyed Richard's life, stolen his money, and left him to die alone and broken. The truth was so much worse than any of them knew. Richard Whitmore had been her husband for 8 years. 8 years of hell disguised as a fairy tale marriage. To the outside world they looked perfect. The successful white businessman and his beautiful black wife, living in their mansion on the hill, driving expensive cars, attending charity galas. Everyone thought Richard was so progressive, so modern for marrying her. They thought he was a good man who saw past color and fell in love with her heart. But behind closed doors, Richard had been a monster. He had controlled every aspect of her life. Where she went, who she talked to, what she wore, what she ate. He had cut her off from her family and friends, telling them she was too good for them now. He had made her quit her job as a teacher, saying his wife didn't need to work. He had taken her phone, monitored her emails, and made sure she had no money of her own. And when she didn't do exactly what he wanted, when she dared to question him or show any sign of independence, he would remind her of her place. Not with his fists, Richard was too smart for that. He used words like weapons, cutting her down piece by piece until she felt smaller than dust. "Nobody would believe you," he would say with that cold smile. "Look at us. I'm the respected businessman, the pillar of the community. You're just some girl from the wrong side of town who got lucky. If you ever try to leave me, I'll destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are." The worst part was that he was right. Nobody would have believed her. Richard had spent years building his perfect image while systematically destroying hers. He had told everyone that she was unstable, that she had tried to hurt herself, that she was jealous and paranoid. He had created a paper trail of lies, fake medical records, fake police reports, fake witness statements. When she finally found the courage to leave him 3 months ago, he had made good on his promises. He had told everyone that she had been stealing from him, that she had threatened to kill him, that she had been having affairs with multiple men. He had frozen all their bank accounts, claiming she was trying to steal his money. He had filed restraining orders against her, saying she was dangerous and unstable. The final blow came when he somehow got her fired from the new teaching job she had found. He had called the school board and told them she was mentally ill and a danger to children. They let her go immediately, not even giving her a chance to defend herself. Jasmine had spent the last 3 months living in a tiny apartment, working as a waitress just to pay rent, while Richard lived in their mansion and played the victim. Everyone felt sorry for him. Poor Richard, with his crazy ex-wife who had tried to ruin his life. Then 2 weeks ago Richard had died of a heart attack. Jasmine had heard about it from a customer at the restaurant where she worked. She had gone home and cried, not because she missed him, but because she had never gotten the chance to prove the truth. She would carry the weight of his lies forever. She hadn't planned to come to the will reading. She knew Richard would have left her nothing, and she couldn't bear the thought of facing all these people who hated her. But then the lawyer had called her personally, saying it was important that she attend. He wouldn't say why, just that she needed to be there. Now, sitting in this room full of people who thought she was a monster, Jasmine wondered if this was Richard's final revenge. Maybe he had found a way to humiliate her one last time, even from beyond the grave. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, was an elderly man with kind eyes. He had been Richard's family lawyer for 30 years. He cleared his throat and stood up, holding a thick envelope. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know this is a difficult time for everyone who loved Richard. Before I begin reading the will, I want you all to know that Richard came to see me just 3 days before he died. He made some significant changes to his will, and he asked me to give you all some context for his decisions." Richard's brother James leaned forward. He was a thin man with mean eyes who had always looked at Jasmine like she was dirt on his shoe. "What kind of changes?" Mr. Peterson opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. "Richard wanted me to start by reading this letter he wrote to all of you. I think it will explain everything." He cleared his throat and began to read. "To my family and friends, if you are hearing this, then I am dead, and it is probably better that way. I have spent the last 8 years of my life living a lie, and I cannot bear the thought of continuing to pretend to be the man you all think I am." A murmur went through the room. Jasmine felt her stomach drop. What was happening? "I need you all to know the truth about my marriage to Jasmine, because the lies I have told about her are eating me alive. She was not the monster I made her out to be. I was." The room went completely silent. Jasmine felt like she couldn't breathe. James Whitmore's face had gone white, and Richard's mother, Helen, was gripping the arms of her chair so tight her knuckles were turning white. Mr. Peterson continued reading Richard's letter. "I married Jasmine because I fell in love with her beauty and her spirit. She was kind and smart and everything I thought I wanted. But once I had her, I became obsessed with controlling her. I was terrified that she would leave me, that she would realize she was too good for me, so I made sure she couldn't." Helen Whitmore stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. Richard would never write such things. Someone must have forced him to." "Mrs. Whitmore, please sit down," Mr. Peterson said firmly. "This letter is in Richard's handwriting and I watched him write it myself. He was of sound mind and body when he came to my office." Helen sat down, but her face was red with anger. "That woman must have threatened him or—" "Mother, let him finish," James said quietly. His voice sounded strange, like he was starting to believe what he was hearing. Mr. Peterson looked around the room before continuing. "I isolated Jasmine from her family and friends. I made her quit her job and took control of all our money. I monitored her every move and made sure she had no independence. When she tried to assert herself, I would tear her down with cruel words until she felt worthless." Jasmine was crying now, but she didn't care who saw. After 3 months of carrying the weight of everyone's hatred, hearing Richard's own words admit the truth felt like a miracle. "But the worst thing I did was the lies I told about her when she finally found the courage to leave me. I couldn't bear the thought of people knowing what I had really done, so I created a false narrative. I told you all that she was unstable, that she had stolen from me, that she had threatened me. None of it was true." The lawyer paused and looked directly at Helen and James. "I forged medical records to make it look like she had mental health issues. I filed false police reports claiming she had threatened me. I bribed people to lie about seeing her with other men. I used my connections to get her fired from her new job." "Oh my God," someone whispered from the back of the room. "Every terrible thing you believe about Jasmine is a lie that I created because I was too much of a coward to admit what I had done to her. She never stole from me. She never threatened me. She never cheated on me. The only thing she did wrong was stay with me as long as she did." Jasmine looked around the room and saw the shock on everyone's faces. Some people were crying. Others looked sick. James was staring at his hands like he couldn't bear to look at anyone. "The truth is that Jasmine was a victim of my abuse for 8 years, and when she finally escaped, I victimized her again with my lies. I have spent the last 3 months watching her struggle to rebuild her life while I continued to play the victim. I am dying inside from the guilt and I cannot take it anymore." Mr. Peterson took a sip of water before continuing. "I know that no amount of money can undo the damage I have done to Jasmine's reputation and her life. But I hope that this confession will at least clear her name and show everyone what kind of man I really was. I also hope that my final act can provide her with the security and freedom that I stole from her during our marriage." The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Jasmine felt like she was in a dream. After all these months of people treating her like a criminal, Richard's own words were finally telling the truth. "I want everyone to know that Jasmine deserves your apologies, not your judgment. She deserves your respect, not your hatred. She deserves a chance to rebuild her life without the shadow of my lies hanging over her." Mr. Peterson folded the letter and set it aside. "That concludes Richard's letter. Now I will read his last will and testament." Helen was crying now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. James looked like he might be sick. Some of the other family members were whispering to each other, their faces full of shame. "I, Richard James Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament," Mr. Peterson began. He went through the standard legal language before getting to the specific bequests. "To my brother James, I leave my collection of vintage cars, valued at approximately $200,000. James nodded numbly. "To my mother Helen, I leave my home in Florida and $1 million from my investment accounts." Helen was still crying, but she managed to whisper, "Thank you." Mr. Peterson continued through a list of smaller gifts to other family members and friends. Everyone got something, a few thousand here, some jewelry there, a piece of art or furniture they had always admired. But as the list went on, Jasmine realized that the big items weren't being mentioned. The mansion they had lived in worth over $3 million. The main business, Whitmore Industries, worth at least $15 million. The bulk of Richard's investment portfolio, which she knew was worth tens of millions. Finally, Mr. Peterson reached the end of the specific bequests and cleared his throat. All remaining assets, including the family home, Whitmore Industries, and all investment and bank accounts not specifically mentioned above, I leave to my ex-wife, Jasmine Marie Whitmore. The room exploded. What? Helen screamed, jumping to her feet. That's impossible. Richard would never. This has to be a mistake, James said, his voice shaking. She can't inherit everything. She's not even family anymore. Mr. Peterson held up his hand for silence. Please let me finish. There's more. The room gradually quieted, but Jasmine could feel the anger and shock radiating from everyone around her. She felt numb, like this couldn't possibly be real. Richard also left specific instructions regarding the inheritance, Mr. Peterson continued. He wrote, I am leaving the majority of my estate to Jasmine not as an apology, no amount of money could ever make up for what I did to her, but as a way to give her back the independence and security that I stole from her. She deserves to live freely without fear of poverty or control from anyone else. This is insane, said Richard's cousin David. She manipulated him into this. There's no way Richard would leave everything to her after what she did. After what she did? Mr. Peterson's voice was sharp. Did you not hear the letter I just read? Jasmine did nothing wrong. Richard admitted that every accusation against her was a lie. Helen was pacing now, her face twisted with rage. I don't care what that letter said. She poisoned his mind against his own family. She must have threatened him or blackmailed him into writing this will. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Peterson said patiently, I understand this is difficult to accept, but Richard came to my office of his own free will. He was not coerced or threatened. In fact, he seemed relieved to finally tell the truth. James was staring at Jasmine with a mixture of confusion and anger. Even if everything Richard said in that letter is true, why would he leave you everything? You were divorced. You have no legal claim to his estate. Jasmine finally found her voice. I don't understand either, she said quietly. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even want to come here today. Of course you didn't ask for it, Helen said sarcastically. You're too smart to make it obvious. But somehow you convinced my son to betray his own family. That's enough, Mr. Peterson said firmly. I will not allow you to continue attacking Jasmine based on lies that Richard himself has now admitted to creating. This will is legal and valid, and I have additional documentation to prove that Richard was acting of his own free will. He pulled out another folder. 3 days before his death, Richard also recorded a video statement in my office, explaining his decision to change his will. He specifically anticipated that there might be challenges to his decision, so he wanted to make his intentions absolutely clear. Show us the video, James demanded. Mr. Peterson set up a laptop on the conference table and turned it so everyone could see the screen. He clicked play, and suddenly Richard's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired and older than his 52 years, but his voice was clear and steady. My name is Richard James Whitmore, and today is March 15, 2025. I am here in the office of Peterson and Associates to record this statement regarding my will. I want everyone to know that I am making these decisions with a clear mind and of my own free will. No one has threatened me or coerced me in any way. On the screen, Richard paused and rubbed his face with his hands. I know my family is going to be angry about my decision to leave most of my estate to Jasmine. They're going to think she manipulated me or that I've lost my mind. But the truth is, I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time in months. Helen was crying again, but this time it sounded more like anger than sadness. I spent 8 years destroying the woman I claimed to love, Richard continued on the video. I took everything from her, her independence, her confidence, her relationships with her family and friends. And when she finally found the strength to leave me, I tried to destroy her reputation and her future too. Richard looked directly into the camera. Jasmine never asked me for anything. Not during our marriage and not after she left. She never tried to take half my assets in the divorce, even though she was legally entitled to them. She just wanted to be free of me. But I couldn't let her go, so I made sure everyone would hate her as much as I hated myself. James was shaking his head. This doesn't make sense. If he felt so guilty, why didn't he just apologize to her? Why leave her everything? On the screen, Richard seemed to answer his question. I know some people will ask why I don't just apologize to Jasmine and try to make things right while I'm still alive. The truth is, I'm too much of a coward. I can't face her after what I've done. I can't look in her eyes and see the pain I've caused. But I can try to give her back some of what I took from her. The video continued for another few minutes, with Richard explaining that he wanted Jasmine to have the financial security to rebuild her life however she chose. He talked about how he had always known she was too good for him, and how his fear of losing her had turned him into a monster. When the video ended, the room was silent again. Even Helen had stopped crying and was just staring at the blank screen. Mr. Peterson closed the laptop. As you can see, Richard's decision was deliberate and well considered. The will is legal and binding, and I have all the necessary documentation to probate it immediately. How much? Jasmine asked quietly. How much did he leave me? Mr. Peterson consulted his papers. After the specific bequest to family members, the remaining estate is valued at approximately $47 million. Jasmine felt like the room was spinning. $47 million. She had been living on tips from waiting tables, and now she was inheriting more money than she could even comprehend. This is a nightmare, Helen whispered. My son leaves everything to the woman who destroyed his life. Your son destroyed his own life, Mr. Peterson said quietly, and he spent his final days trying to repair some of the damage he had done to an innocent woman. James stood up and looked at Jasmine. Even if Richard wrote that letter and made that video, I still don't understand. If you really were the victim he claimed you were, why would you want his money? Wouldn't it just remind you of everything he put you through? Jasmine stood up too, feeling stronger than she had in months. You want to know why I'll take his money? She said, her voice getting stronger with each word. Because for 8 years he made sure I had nothing. No job, no friends, no family, no money of my own. When I left him, I had to start over with nothing while he kept everything. And then he spent 3 months making sure I couldn't even get a decent job because of his lies. She looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. I'll take his money because I earned it. I earned every dollar by surviving 8 years of hell. I earned it by finding the courage to leave. And I earned it by holding my head up while everyone in this room treated me like garbage because of his lies. Helen opened her mouth to say something, but Jasmine wasn't finished. And you know what I'm going to do with that money? I'm going to use it to help other women who are trapped the way I was. I'm going to make sure Richard's legacy is actually helping people instead of destroying them. With that, she turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, she could hear people starting to argue and shout, but she didn't look back. For the first time in 8 years, she was walking away as a free woman. Jasmine sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the business card Mr. Peterson had given her. It had been 3 days since the will reading, and she still couldn't believe it was real. $47 million. She kept saying the number out loud, but it didn't feel real. Her phone had been ringing constantly since word got out about the inheritance. Reporters wanted to interview her about the shocking will reading. Family members she hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Old friends who had believed Richard's lies were calling to apologize. She had turned off her phone and hidden in her apartment, trying to process everything that had happened. There was a knock at her door. Jasmine froze. Very few people knew where she lived, and she wasn't expecting anyone. The knocking continued, gentle but persistent. Jasmine? It's me, your sister Angela. Please open the door. Jasmine's heart jumped. She hadn't spoken to Angela in over a year. Richard had convinced her that her family was jealous of her new life and didn't really love her. He had gradually cut her off from everyone who might have helped her see what he was doing. She opened the door and saw Angela standing there with tears in her eyes. Her little sister looked older than her 28 years, with worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Oh, Jazz, Angela said, using the nickname she'd had since childhood. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I believed him. The sisters fell into each other's arms, both crying. They stood in the doorway for several minutes before Jasmine finally pulled Angela inside and closed the door. I should have known, Angela said, wiping her eyes. I should have known you would never do the things he said you did. But he was so convincing and you just disappeared from our lives so completely. Jasmine made tea while Angela sat at her tiny kitchen table. The apartment was a studio with barely enough room for one person, let alone visitors. It was a far cry from the mansion she had lived in with Richard. He made it impossible for me to contact anyone, Jasmine explained. He convinced me that you all thought I was too good for you now. He said you were all jealous and that it would be better if I made a clean break. We tried to reach you, Angela said. Mama called and called, but Richard always answered and said you didn't want to talk to us. He said you were embarrassed by your background now that you were rich. Jasmine felt a fresh wave of anger at Richard. Even from beyond the grave, she was still discovering new ways he had manipulated and isolated her. When you finally left him, we tried to call you then too, Angela continued. But Richard told everyone you had threatened him and that you were having some kind of breakdown. He said you were dangerous and that we shouldn't try to contact you. And you believed him? Angela looked ashamed. He showed us police reports. He had medical records that said you were unstable. He even had pictures of you that looked like you were using drugs or something. We didn't want to believe it, but the evidence seemed so real. It was all fake, Jasmine said. He admitted it in his letter. He forged everything. I know. I read about the will reading in the newspaper. I can't believe what he put you through. Angela reached across the table and took her sister's hand. Can you ever forgive us for not being there for you? Jasmine squeezed her sister's hand. There's nothing to forgive. He fooled everyone. That's what he was good at. They talked for hours, catching up on everything that had happened. Angela told her about their parents, who were both doing well but had been heartbroken thinking they had lost their daughter. She told her about her own life. She had gotten married and had a baby, a little girl named Hope. You're an aunt, Angela said, showing her pictures on her phone. Hope is 18 months old now, and she's the most beautiful baby in the world. Jasmine looked at the pictures and felt her heart break a little. She had missed so much. All because Richard couldn't stand the thought of her having relationships that he couldn't control. I want to meet her, Jasmine said. I want to meet my niece and see Mama and Daddy again. They want to see you too. Mama cries every time someone mentions your name. She never stopped hoping you'd come back to us. As the sun started to set, Angela had to leave to get home to her family. But before she left, she helped Jasmine make a list of everyone they needed to call. Their parents, other family members, old friends who had been shut out of her life. What are you going to do with all that money? Angela asked as she was getting ready to leave. I meant what I said at the will reading, Jasmine replied. I want to help other women who are trapped the way I was. But I don't really know how to start. You'll figure it out. You always were the smart one in the family. After Angela left, Jasmine sat in her apartment feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time since leaving Richard, she wasn't completely alone. She had her family back. But her peace was short-lived. An hour later there was another knock at her door. This time it was more aggressive, demanding. Open up, Jasmine. We need to talk. She recognized the voice. It was James Whitmore, Richard's brother. Her blood ran cold. What did he want? Go away, James. I don't want to talk to you. I'm not leaving until we discuss this situation. You can't just steal my family's money and think there won't be consequences. Jasmine's hands shook as she called 911. She told the operator that Richard's brother was at her door making threats, and that she was afraid for her safety. I've already called the police, she called through the door. If you don't leave right now, I'm having you arrested. She heard him curse and stomp away. A few minutes later, a police car pulled up outside her building. The officers took her statement and promised to drive by her apartment regularly for the next few days. But Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. Richard's family wasn't going to give up easily. They were going to fight for what they thought was rightfully theirs, and she was going to need help. She picked up Mr. Peterson's business card and dialed his number. It was time to start fighting back. Mr. Peterson's office was busy the next morning when Jasmine arrived. His secretary led her into a smaller conference room where the elderly lawyer was waiting with several files spread across the table. I'm glad you called, he said, standing to shake her hand. I was expecting Richard's family to cause problems. James has already called me twice this morning demanding to contest the will. Jasmine sat down, feeling overwhelmed. Can they do that? Can they take the inheritance away from me? They can try, Mr. Peterson said honestly. But they don't have much of a case. Richard was clearly of sound mind when he made the will, and we have extensive documentation proving that. The video recording alone should be enough to stop any challenge. He opened one of the files. However, I do think we need to be prepared for a long fight. The Whitmore family isn't going to walk away from $47 million without exhausting every legal option. What kind of fight? They'll probably claim that you manipulated or coerced Richard into changing his will. They might try to argue that he was mentally incompetent due to guilt or depression. They'll dig into every aspect of your relationship with Richard, looking for anything they can use against you. Jasmine felt sick. So I'm going to have to relive everything he did to me in public while his family tries to make me out to be the villain again? Mr. Peterson's expression was sympathetic. I'm afraid so. But this time you won't be facing it alone. Richard's confession changes everything. We have proof that his previous accusations against you were lies. He pulled out another document. I've also been doing some investigating into Richard's business practices, and I've found some interesting information that might help us. What kind of information? It appears that Richard may have been involved in some questionable financial dealings over the past few years. Nothing illegal, but some very aggressive tax avoidance strategies that his family might not want to become public knowledge. Jasmine frowned. Are you saying we should blackmail them? Not blackmail, Mr. Peterson said quickly. But we can make it clear that a public court battle would expose all of Richard's business dealings to scrutiny. Sometimes the threat of embarrassing publicity is enough to encourage people to settle quietly. They spent the next hour going over legal strategies and discussing what to expect in the coming weeks. Mr. Peterson assured her that he would handle all communication with the Whitmore family's lawyers, so she wouldn't have to deal with them directly. There is one more thing, he said as their meeting was ending. Richard left you a sealed envelope with instructions that it should only be given to you after you had accepted the inheritance. Since you haven't officially declined it, I think it's appropriate to give it to you now. He handed her a white envelope with her name written on it in Richard's familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she took it. Do you want to open it now, or would you prefer privacy? I'll read it later, she said, tucking the envelope into her purse. She wasn't sure she was ready to hear anything else Richard had to say. When she got home, Jasmine called her sister Angela to fill her in on the meeting with the lawyer. Angela was outraged that Richard's family was still trying to hurt her. They have some nerve, Angela said. After everything that man put you through, and now that he's finally told the truth, they still want to make you the villain. I just want this to be over, Jasmine said. I want to take the money and use it for something good and move on with my life. Then that's what you'll do. Don't let them intimidate you. After they hung up, Jasmine sat on her couch and stared at the sealed envelope. Part of her wanted to throw it away without reading it. She had heard enough from Richard to last a lifetime. But another part of her was curious about what he might have said in private that he hadn't included in his public confession. Finally, she tore open the envelope and pulled out several pages of handwritten text. Dear Jasmine, it began. If you are reading this, then you have accepted the inheritance I left you, and my lawyer has given you this letter. I hope you can find it in your heart to read my words, even though I know I have no right to ask anything of you. Jasmine almost stopped reading right there. She didn't want to hear Richard's self-pity or his attempts to make himself feel better about what he had done. But something made her continue. I know you must wonder why I decided to leave you everything instead of just clearing your name and leaving you alone. The truth is that I owe you more than just the truth. I owe you the years of your life that I stole from you. The letter went on to describe specific incidents from their marriage that Jasmine had tried to forget. Richard wrote about times when he had deliberately sabotaged job opportunities she had been excited about. He described how he had intercepted letters and phone calls from her family. He admitted to throwing away birthday cards and Christmas presents they had sent her, telling her that her family didn't care about her anymore. I want you to know that your family never stopped trying to reach you, he wrote. Your mother called every week for the first 2 years after we got married. Your father sent you letters that I threw away. Your sister Angela tried to visit several times, but I always found excuses to send her away when you weren't home. Jasmine was crying now, thinking about all the love and support she had missed out on because of Richard's jealousy and control. The letter continued with more confessions about his manipulation and abuse, but toward the end, the tone shifted. I am not writing this letter to ask for your forgiveness. I know that what I did is unforgivable and I don't deserve your compassion. I am writing to give you information that might help you understand why I made the decisions I did, and to help you move forward with your life. Richard went on to explain that he had been diagnosed with heart problems 6 months before his death, and that his doctor had told him he probably didn't have long to live. That was when he had started to confront what he had done to her. Facing my own mortality made me realize that I had wasted the only real love I had ever found. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it because I was too insecure and controlling to appreciate what I had. The letter ended with specific instructions about the inheritance. I have left you enough money to never have to depend on anyone again. I want you to know that you have the power to make your own choices and live your own life. I hope you will use some of the money to help other women who are trapped the way you were, but ultimately, it is yours to do with as you choose. There is one final thing I need to tell you. In my desk at the house, in the locked bottom drawer, there is a folder marked Jasmine. It contains copies of all the real documents about our marriage, bank statements, property records, everything that proves you were never involved in any wrongdoing. It also contains the originals of all the fake documents I created to frame you. I think you should have them, both to protect yourself and to help other women who might be in similar situations. The letter was signed simply, Richard. Jasmine sat back and wiped her eyes. Even in death, Richard was still revealing new layers of his deception. But this time, instead of feeling defeated, she felt empowered. She had proof of everything he had done, and she had the resources to make sure it never happened to anyone else. She picked up her phone and called Mr. Peterson again. It was time to get that folder from Richard's house, and it was time to start planning how she was going to use her new fortune to make a difference. Getting into Richard's house, her former home, was more complicated than Jasmine had expected. The property was part of the estate she had inherited, but Helen Whitmore had been staying there since Richard's death, and she wasn't eager to let Jasmine inside. "I don't care what that will says," Helen told Mr. Peterson over the phone. "That woman is not setting foot in my son's house." "Mrs. Whitmore," Mr. Peterson replied patiently, "it's not your son's house anymore. It belongs to Jasmine now, and she has every legal right to enter the property." It took 3 days and a court order before Helen finally agreed to let Jasmine into the house, and even then she insisted on being present during the visit. Jasmine hadn't been back to the mansion since the day she left Richard 3 months ago. Walking through the front door brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. The house was exactly as she remembered it, cold and beautiful, like a museum where real people weren't supposed to live. Helen followed her through the house like a suspicious guard, making snide comments about everything Jasmine touched. "I suppose you're already planning to sell this place?" Helen said as they walked through the living room. "Cash in on everything Richard worked for." "I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the house," Jasmine replied honestly. She was trying to stay calm and professional, but being back in this place with Richard's hostile mother was bringing back all the old feelings of anxiety and helplessness. They made their way upstairs to Richard's home office. The room looked exactly the same: dark wood furniture, expensive leather chairs, and walls lined with books that Richard had never actually read but kept for show. Helen stood in the doorway with her arms crossed while Jasmine approached Richard's desk. The bottom drawer was locked, just as his letter had said. Mr. Peterson had brought a locksmith, who quickly opened it. Inside the drawer was a thick manila folder marked Jasmine, in Richard's handwriting. Jasmine's hands shook as she pulled it out and opened it. The folder was divided into 2 sections. The first section contained real documents from their marriage, bank statements showing that Jasmine had never taken any money without Richard's permission, property records proving she had no involvement in any shady business deals, and medical records from her real doctor showing she had never been treated for mental health issues. The second section made her feel sick. It contained copies of all the fake documents Richard had created to destroy her reputation. Forged medical records claiming she was bipolar and had been hospitalized multiple times. Fake police reports saying she had threatened Richard and had been caught stealing. False witness statements from people claiming they had seen her with other men. "What is that?" Helen demanded, trying to see over Jasmine's shoulder. "Evidence," Jasmine said, closing the folder. "Evidence of what your son really did to me." Helen's face went red. "I don't care what lies he told in that letter. Richard was a good man and you destroyed him." Jasmine turned to face her former mother-in-law. "Your son admitted to 8 years of emotional abuse. He admitted to lying about me to everyone we knew. He admitted to forging documents to frame me for crimes I never committed. How can you still defend him? Because you made him do it." Helen screamed. "You drove him crazy with your manipulation and your threats. He was just trying to protect himself." Mr. Peterson stepped into the room. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think it would be best if you waited downstairs while we finish here." Helen looked like she wanted to argue, but something in the lawyer's tone made her back down. She left the room, but Jasmine could hear her pacing in the hallway outside. "Are you all right?" Mr. Peterson asked. Jasmine nodded, though she felt anything but all right. Being back in this house was bringing back memories she had tried to bury. She could remember sitting in this very room while Richard screamed at her for some imagined transgression. She could remember him making her call in sick to work because he didn't want her to leave the house. She could remember the way he would smile coldly when he told her that no one would ever believe her if she tried to leave him. "Let's get out of here," she said, clutching the folder to her chest. But as they were heading toward the door, Helen appeared at the top of the stairs with several other people. James and his wife, Richard's cousin David, and 2 other family members Jasmine didn't recognize well. "We need to talk," James said, blocking their path. "There's nothing to discuss," Mr. Peterson replied. "The will is legal and binding." "The will is a fraud," said David. "Richard was clearly not in his right mind when he wrote it. He was being manipulated by her." James stepped closer to Jasmine. "What did you do to him? Did you threaten to expose some secret? Did you have pictures of him with another woman?" "I didn't do anything to him," Jasmine said, her voice getting stronger. Your brother was guilty about what he had done to me, and he decided to try to make it right. Bullshit, James said. Richard never felt guilty about anything in his life. You must have had something on him. Helen was crying again. She's going to sell everything. She's going to destroy everything Richard built and scatter it to the wind. Actually, Jasmine said, surprising herself with her calm tone, I've decided what I'm going to do with the money. Everyone stared at her. I'm going to use it to start a foundation for women who are victims of domestic abuse. I'm going to help them escape situations like the one your son trapped me in. And I'm going to make sure that men like Richard can never again destroy women's lives with lies and manipulation. The silence that followed was deafening. James was the first to speak. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, Jasmine replied. Your brother spent 8 years trying to destroy me. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other women don't go through what I went through. Richard's money will not be used for such purposes, Helen said, her voice shaking with rage. I won't allow it. It's not Richard's money anymore, Jasmine said. It's mine. And I'll use it however I choose. She pushed past the group of angry family members and headed down the stairs with Mr. Peterson close behind her. As they reached the front door, she could hear them arguing among themselves about what to do next. They're going to fight harder now, Mr. Peterson warned as they got into his car. Let them fight, Jasmine said. I'm not the same scared woman I was 3 months ago. I have the truth on my side now and I have the resources to fight back. As they drove away from the mansion, Jasmine felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. For the first time since Richard's death, she had a clear vision of her future. She was going to take the money he had left her and use it to help other women escape the kind of hell she had lived through. Richard had tried to control her even in death by making her wealthy enough to never need anyone again. But he had miscalculated. Instead of isolating her, the inheritance was going to give her the power to connect with and help other women who were suffering the way she had suffered. It was going to be the sweetest revenge of all. The news about Jasmine's plans for the inheritance spread quickly through town. Within a week, she was getting phone calls from reporters, lawyers, and advocacy groups. Some were supportive, others were skeptical, and a few were openly hostile. Helen Whitmore had apparently been giving interviews to anyone who would listen, painting Jasmine as a gold-digging manipulator who was now planning to waste Richard's hard-earned money on ungrateful women who should just leave their husbands if they're so unhappy. But for every negative comment, Jasmine received 2 messages of support. Women she had never met were calling to share their own stories of abuse and control. Lawyers were offering to help her set up the foundation. Established domestic violence organizations were reaching out to collaborate. The most surprising call came from Dr. Sarah Martinez, a therapist who specialized in helping abuse victims. I've been following your story in the news, Dr. Martinez said. I wanted you to know that what you're planning to do is incredibly important. There are so many women who need exactly the kind of help you're talking about providing. I'm not really sure where to start, Jasmine admitted. I know what it's like to be trapped, but I don't know much about running a foundation or helping other people get free. Would you like to meet for coffee? I have some ideas that might help. They met the next day at a small cafe downtown. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Jasmine at ease. The biggest barrier for most abuse victims isn't recognizing that they're being abused, Dr. Martinez explained. It's having the practical resources to leave. They need money for deposits on apartments, legal fees for divorces, job training if they've been kept out of the workforce, and childcare while they're getting back on their feet. That's exactly what I needed when I left Richard, Jasmine said. I had nothing. If I hadn't been lucky enough to find that waitressing job, I don't know what I would have done. Your foundation could provide emergency grants to women who are trying to leave abusive situations. You could also fund safe houses, legal aid programs, and job training initiatives. They talked for 2 hours, and by the end of their conversation, Jasmine had a much clearer picture of what she wanted to accomplish. Dr. Martinez agreed to help her develop the foundation's programs and recruit other professionals to serve on the board. But not everyone was supportive of Jasmine's plans. That evening she received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. You think you're so smart, don't you? The voice was male and angry, but she couldn't identify it. You think you can just steal a man's money and use it to destroy other families? Who is this? Jasmine demanded. Someone who knows what you really are. We're not going to let you get away with this. The line went dead. Jasmine immediately called the police, but they said there wasn't much they could do about anonymous threats unless something more serious happened. Mr. Peterson arranged for Jasmine to have a security consultation with a private company. The security expert recommended that she move out of her small apartment and into a safer location while the will contest was ongoing. The Whitmore family has a lot of money and a lot of connections, he warned. They're not going to give up easily, and they might try to intimidate you into backing down. Jasmine found a furnished apartment in a secure building across town. It was larger than her studio but still modest compared to the mansion she had once lived in. She was starting to realize that inheriting $47 million came with complications she had never imagined. The legal battle was heating up too. James Whitmore had hired a team of expensive lawyers who were arguing that Richard had been mentally incompetent when he changed his will. They claimed that the guilt and stress of the divorce had driven him to make irrational decisions. They're going to try to put Richard's mental state on trial, Mr. Peterson explained during one of their meetings. They'll bring in psychiatrists who will testify that someone in Richard's situation would have been prone to making poor decisions. But we have the video of him explaining his reasoning, Jasmine said. He seemed perfectly rational to me. They'll argue that he was putting on an act for the camera, or that he was being coerced in ways that aren't obvious on the recording. The depositions began 3 weeks later. Jasmine had to sit in a conference room and answer questions from the Whitmore family's lawyers for 8 hours. They asked her about every aspect of her relationship with Richard, trying to find evidence that she had manipulated or threatened him. Isn't it true that you threatened to expose Mr. Whitmore's business dealings if he didn't give you money? One lawyer asked. No, that's not true, Jasmine replied. I never threatened Richard with anything. But you were aware of his business activities, weren't you? You lived in his house. You knew about his finances. I knew very little about Richard's business. He kept all of that information from me. The questioning went on, with the lawyers trying to twist her words and make her seem like a scheming gold digger. But Jasmine had learned a lot about standing up for herself over the past few months, and she refused to be intimidated. When it was their turn, Mr. Peterson's team was able to present all of Richard's fake documents as evidence of his systematic campaign to destroy Jasmine's reputation. They also brought in several witnesses who testified about Richard's controlling behavior during their marriage. Angela testified about how Richard had cut Jasmine off from her family. Dr. Martinez testified about the psychological patterns typical in abusive relationships. Even Jasmine's former boss from the restaurant testified about how hard she had worked to rebuild her life after leaving Richard. The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Margaret Chen had been Richard's secretary for 15 years, and she had seen how he treated Jasmine during their marriage. Mr. Whitmore would call his wife multiple times every day to check on her, Margaret testified. He would have her pick him up from work so he could control when she left the house. He monitored her email and phone calls. I knew it wasn't normal, but I didn't think it was my place to say anything. Margaret also testified that she had witnessed Richard creating some of the fake documents about Jasmine. He asked me to type up some police reports and medical records, she said. When I asked him why he needed fake documents, he said it was to protect himself from his crazy ex-wife. I should have refused to help him, but I was afraid of losing my job. By the end of the depositions, it was clear that Richard's family was fighting an uphill battle. The evidence of his abuse and manipulation was overwhelming, and their arguments about his mental incompetence weren't holding up. But Jasmine knew the fight wasn't over yet. The Whitmores were wealthy and powerful, and they weren't going to give up easily. She was going to have to be strong for whatever came next. The court case made headlines in the local newspaper. Widow fights for inheritance after husband's shocking confession. Jasmine tried to avoid reading the articles, but people kept sending them to her or bringing them up in conversation. Most of the coverage was surprisingly fair, focusing on Richard's own admissions of abuse rather than the family's claims that Jasmine was a manipulator. But the attention was overwhelming for someone who had spent 8 years being isolated from the world. The support she received was equally overwhelming. Women from all over the state were reaching out to share their own stories and offer help with the foundation. Donations were already coming in from people who wanted to support her cause, even before the foundation was officially established. But the negative attention was harder to handle. Helen Whitmore was giving interviews to anyone who would listen, calling Jasmine a heartless gold digger who destroyed my son and is now trying to destroy his memory. The breaking point came when Jasmine arrived at her new apartment one evening to find the words, "murderer," and "whore" spray painted on her door. She called the police, but they said it was probably just vandalism and there wasn't much they could do without witnesses. That night she called Angela, crying. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "Maybe I should just give them the money and walk away." "Don't you dare," Angela said firmly. Richard put you through hell for 8 years, and now his family wants to put you through hell to protect his reputation. You can't let them win. But what if they're right? What if I am just being vindictive? Jazz, listen to me. You survived 8 years of abuse. You found the courage to leave when you had nothing. You've been rebuilding your life from scratch while everyone treated you like a criminal. You are the strongest person I know, and you are not vindictive. You are trying to help other women avoid what you went through. Angela's words helped, but Jasmine still felt overwhelmed by the pressure. She decided to take a few days away from everything and visit her parents, whom she still hadn't seen since reconnecting with Angela. The drive to her childhood home took 3 hours, and with each mile, Jasmine felt some of the tension leaving her body. She had grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, but it felt peaceful compared to the media attention and legal battles she was facing now. Her parents' house looked exactly the same as she remembered, a small but well-maintained home with a garden full of flowers and vegetables. Her mother was waiting on the porch when she pulled into the driveway. "My baby," her mother said, wrapping her in a tight hug. "My sweet baby girl." They both cried, holding each other on the front porch like Jasmine was coming home from war. Her father appeared in the doorway, tears in his eyes. He was a quiet man who had worked construction his whole life, and he wasn't much for emotional displays. But when he hugged his daughter, she could feel him shaking. "I should have known," he said quietly. "I should have known that man was keeping you from us. It's not your fault, Daddy." He was very good at making his lies seem believable. They spent the evening catching up on 8 years of missed conversations. Her parents told her about neighbors and relatives, about changes in the town, about all the letters and calls they had made trying to reach her. Jasmine told them about her life with Richard, about the abuse she had endured, and about her plans for the foundation. "I'm proud of you," her father said finally. "It takes courage to turn something terrible into something good." The next morning, Jasmine woke up in her childhood bedroom feeling more centered than she had in months. Her mother made her favorite breakfast, pancakes with homemade syrup, and they sat at the kitchen table talking about the future. "Have you thought about what you're going to name the foundation?" her mother asked. "Not really. I've been so focused on the legal battle that I haven't gotten that far." "What about Hope House? After your niece?" Jasmine smiled. "Hope House. I like that." She spent 3 days with her parents, helping in the garden and taking long walks through the town where she had grown up. It was exactly what she needed to remember who she was before Richard had tried to destroy her sense of self. When she returned to the city, she felt ready to face whatever the Whitmore family threw at her next. She didn't have to wait long. Mr. Peterson called her the day after she got back. "They're offering to settle," he said. "They want to keep 20 million and let you have the rest. What do you think?" "I think they're getting nervous. Their case isn't as strong as they hoped, and the publicity isn't going their way. But it's your decision." Jasmine thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. "No deal. If Richard wanted them to have that money, he would have left it to them. He left it to me for a reason, and I'm going to honor that. They're not going to like that answer. I don't care what they like. I'm done being afraid of the Whitmore family." 2 days later, James Whitmore called her directly, which surprised her since all communication was supposed to go through the lawyers. "You're making a mistake," he said without preamble. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. We have resources you can't imagine, and we're not going to let you destroy our family's legacy." "Your family's legacy is already destroyed," Jasmine replied calmly. "Your brother destroyed it when he chose to be an abuser and a liar. I'm just trying to make something good come out of something terrible. Richard was a good man who made mistakes. You're trying to paint him as a monster to justify stealing his money. Richard painted himself as a monster in his own words. I didn't have to do anything but tell the truth." James was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less angry and more desperate. "Look, I know Richard wasn't perfect. But he was still my brother, and this money represents everything our family worked for over 3 generations. You can't just give it all away to some charity." For the first time, Jasmine felt a tiny bit of sympathy for Richard's family. They were watching their inheritance disappear, and they genuinely believed they were the victims in this situation. "James," she said gently, "I understand that you loved your brother. But loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Richard hurt me for 8 years, and then he tried to destroy my life when I finally found the courage to leave. The money he left me is his way of trying to make that right. But why give it all away? Why not just keep it and live your life? Because keeping it all for myself would make me just as selfish as Richard was. He had more money than he could ever spend, but he used it to control and hurt people. I want to use it to help people. After she hung up, Jasmine realized that she had finally articulated why Richard's inheritance meant so much to her. It wasn't about the money itself. It was about the opportunity to transform something that had been used for evil into something that could do good. She was going to win this fight, and then she was going to change the world. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late April. Jasmine arrived at the courthouse with Mr. Peterson and his legal team, expecting to face the usual crowd of reporters and photographers. What she didn't expect was the group of women holding signs that read, "We Believe Jasmine," and "Hope House Foundation." "Who are they?" she asked Mr. Peterson. "Supporters," he said with a smile. "Word has gotten out about what you're trying to do, and people want to show their support." Among the crowd, Jasmine spotted Dr. Martinez and several other women she had spoken with about the foundation. There was also a group she didn't recognize, older women with determined expressions and professional clothing. One of them approached her. "Ms. Whitmore? I'm Patricia Goldman. I'm a retired family court judge, and I wanted you to know that there are a lot of people in this community who support what you're doing." "Thank you," Jasmine said, feeling overwhelmed by the show of support. "Domestic abuse is a problem that affects every level of society," Judge Goldman continued. "Your foundation could make a real difference for women who have nowhere else to turn." Inside the courthouse, the Whitmore family was already seated with their team of lawyers. Helen looked older and more frail than she had at the will reading, but her eyes were still full of hatred when she looked at Jasmine. James avoided eye contact entirely. The judge was an elderly man named Judge Harrison who had been on the bench for over 20 years. He listened patiently as both sides presented their arguments. The Whitmore's lawyer argued that Richard had been suffering from severe depression and guilt that had impaired his judgment. He brought in a psychiatrist who testified that Richard's behavior in his final months was consistent with someone having a mental breakdown. Mr. Whitmore was clearly not thinking rationally when he made these changes to his will, the lawyer argued. He was being manipulated by feelings of guilt that were out of proportion to any mistakes he might have made in his marriage. But when Mr. Peterson presented Richard's own evidence, the letter, the video, and the folder full of forged documents, the psychiatrist's testimony seemed less convincing. "Your Honor," Mr. Peterson said, "we're not asking you to take our word for Richard Whitmore's state of mind. We're asking you to listen to his own words." In his letter and video, he clearly explains his reasoning for changing his will. He admits to 8 years of systematic abuse and manipulation. He provides evidence of his own wrongdoing. Does this sound like the rambling of a mentally incompetent person, or the confession of someone finally ready to face the truth about his actions? The most dramatic moment came when Margaret Chin, Richard's former secretary, testified about helping him create the fake documents. "Mr. Whitmore was very specific about what he wanted these documents to say," she testified. "He had me type up fake police reports, fake medical records, even fake witness statements. When I asked him why he needed these things, he said it was to protect himself from his ex-wife's lies. But now I realize he was creating the lies himself." Helen Whitmore stood up suddenly and shouted, "She's lying. Richard would never do such things." Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Mrs. Whitmore, you will remain seated and silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Helen sat down, but she was crying and shaking with anger. The hearing lasted all day. By the time both sides had finished presenting their arguments, it was nearly 5 o'clock. Judge Harrison said he would review all the evidence and issue his decision within a week. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of supporters had grown larger. Several women approached Jasmine to share their own stories of abuse and to thank her for speaking out. "You're giving hope to women who thought they had no options," one woman said. "My sister is trapped in a marriage just like yours was. When she sees what you've accomplished, maybe she'll find the courage to leave too." That evening, Jasmine had dinner with Angela and her parents, who had driven up for the hearing. Little Hope, her 18-month-old niece, babbled and laughed in her high chair, oblivious to the adult drama surrounding her. "Whatever happens with the court case," her father said, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You could have taken that money and disappeared, but instead you're using it to help other people." "I just want to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to other women," Jasmine said. "It's going to happen," Angela said confidently. "You're going to win this case, and you're going to start your foundation, and you're going to help thousands of women escape situations like yours." 3 days later, Mr. Peterson called with the news. "We won," he said simply. Judge Harrison upheld the will in its entirety. His written decision was very clear. He found that Richard was competent when he made the changes, and that the evidence of his previous deception was overwhelming. Jasmine felt like she could breathe for the first time in months. What happens now? Now we finalize the probate process, and you officially become one of the wealthiest women in the state. The Whitmores can appeal, but I don't think they will. Judge Harrison's decision was pretty definitive. That evening, Jasmine called Dr. Martinez to share the good news and to start making concrete plans for Hope House Foundation. I want to move quickly, she said. There are women out there right now who need help, and I don't want to waste any more time. I've already started putting together a list of board members and staff, Dr. Martinez said. We could be operational within 6 months. What about the house, Richard's mansion? I was thinking it might make a good headquarters for the foundation. That's a wonderful idea. It would be poetic justice, turning a place where abuse happened into a place where abuse victims get help. As they talked about budgets and programs and timelines, Jasmine felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. For 8 years, Richard had made her feel small and powerless. Now, with the money he had left her, she was going to help other women find their own power. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was turning out to be exactly the life she was meant to live. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in the foyer of what had once been Richard's mansion, watching as workers hung a sign that read Hope House Foundation, Main Office. The house had been completely renovated to serve as the foundation's headquarters, with offices for staff, meeting rooms for support groups, and a resource center for women seeking help. The transformation had been both practical and symbolic. Every room that held bad memories had been given a new purpose. Richard's home office, where he had created the fake documents to destroy her reputation, was now Dr. Martinez's therapy office where she counseled abuse victims. The master bedroom, where Jasmine had spent so many nights lying awake in fear, was now a comfortable meeting space where women could share their stories and find support. The foundation had officially launched 3 months earlier, and they were already helping dozens of women across the state. They provided emergency grants for women trying to leave abusive situations, funded legal aid for divorce proceedings, and offered job training programs for women who had been kept out of the workforce. But the most important program, in Jasmine's opinion, was the one they called Truth and Consequences. Working with law enforcement and family courts, Hope House helped document cases where abusers tried to destroy their victims' reputations with false accusations. They had already helped 3 women prove that their ex-husbands had created fake evidence against them, just as Richard had done to Jasmine. Ms. Whitmore? Jasmine turned to see a young woman standing nervously in the doorway. She was thin and pale, with bruises on her arms that she was trying to hide with long sleeves. Please call me Jasmine. How can I help you? I saw the story about you on the news. About what your husband did and how you got away. I was wondering. I need help, but I don't know if I qualify for your programs. Jasmine guided the woman to one of the comfortable sitting areas they had set up in the main living room. What's your name? Rebecca. Rebecca Martinez. She laughed nervously. No relation to Dr. Martinez, I checked. My husband, he's been telling everyone that I'm crazy. That I'm dangerous. He's got the police believing him, and my own family thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown. What's he been telling them? That I threatened to kill him. That I've been stealing money from him. That I'm using drugs. Rebecca started crying. None of it's true, but he has all these documents that prove it. Medical records, police reports, even pictures that make it look like I'm doing drugs. Jasmine felt her heart clench. It was like looking at herself from a year ago. Rebecca, those documents are probably fake. My husband did the same thing to me. He created an entire false history to make me look like the villain. But how can I prove they're fake? He's so smart and he has so much money. Everyone believes him. That's why this foundation exists, Jasmine said gently. We have lawyers who specialize in exposing these kinds of lies. We have forensic accountants who can prove financial manipulation. We have investigators who can uncover the truth. For the next hour, Jasmine listened to Rebecca's story, which was heartbreakingly similar to her own. Rebecca's husband was a successful businessman who had isolated her from her family and friends, controlled every aspect of her life, and was now trying to destroy her reputation to prevent her from leaving him. The hardest part, Rebecca said, is that everyone thinks he's such a good man. He's charming and successful and generous with his money. Nobody believes that he could be capable of what he's doing to me. I know exactly what you mean, Jasmine said. Richard had everyone convinced that he was the perfect husband and I was the crazy wife. It took his own confession to make people see the truth. Do you think there's hope for someone like me? Someone who doesn't have a confession from her abuser? There's always hope, Jasmine said firmly. That's why we called this place Hope House. No matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward. They spent another hour going over Rebecca's options and connecting her with the appropriate staff members. By the time she left, Rebecca looked lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As Jasmine watched her drive away, she thought about how different her own life might have been if a place like Hope House had existed when she was trapped in her marriage with Richard. She might have escaped years earlier. She might have avoided the public humiliation and the months of living in poverty while everyone believed Richard's lies. But then again, if her story had been different, she might never have had the motivation or the resources to help other women. In a strange way, Richard's cruelty had given her the tools she needed to fight back against cruelty in general. Angela arrived that evening for the Foundation's 6-month celebration dinner. She brought little Hope, who was now walking and getting into everything with the enthusiasm of a typical toddler. "Look at this place," Angela said, walking through the renovated mansion. "It's hard to believe this is the same house where Richard made you so miserable." "That was the point," Jasmine said. "I wanted to take something that represented control and abuse and turn it into something that represents freedom and healing." "And you did it? You actually did it?" The celebration dinner was held in what had once been Richard's formal dining room. The long table was filled with the Foundation's staff, board members, and some of the women they had helped over the past few months. Rebecca was there, looking healthier and happier than she had when Jasmine first met her. Her divorce was proceeding smoothly now that Hope House's legal team had exposed her husband's fake evidence. Dr. Martinez stood up to make a toast. 6 months ago this was just an idea. One woman's determination to turn her pain into purpose. Tonight we're celebrating the fact that idea has already changed dozens of lives. Everyone raised their glasses, but Dr. Martinez wasn't finished. "I want to read you something," she said, pulling out a letter. This came from a woman in California who heard about Hope House on a national news program. She writes, "I was trapped in an abusive marriage for 12 years. My husband had convinced everyone, including me, that I was mentally ill and couldn't survive without him. When I saw Jasmine's story, I realized that I wasn't crazy. I was being systematically destroyed by someone who claimed to love me. Her courage gave me the courage to leave. I'm writing this letter from my new apartment, where I live with my 2 children, free from fear for the first time in years. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to rebuild your life after abuse." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Jasmine stood up, feeling overwhelmed by emotion. "A year ago, I was living in a tiny apartment, working as a waitress, while everyone in town thought I was a criminal. I thought my life was over. I thought Richard had won." She looked around the room at all the faces, staff members who had dedicated their careers to helping abuse victims, women who had found the courage to leave dangerous situations, family members who had supported her through the darkest times. But Richard didn't win. Love won. Truth won. Hope won. And now, every day we get to help other women discover that they can win too. The applause was thunderous, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "I used to think that revenge meant hurting the people who hurt you. But I've learned that the best revenge is living well, helping others, and refusing to let cruelty have the last word. Richard tried to destroy me, but instead, he gave me the tools to help destroy the cycle of abuse for other women." She raised her glass one more time. "To hope, to healing, and to the knowledge that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way forward." As everyone drank the toast, Jasmine felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into something beautiful. She had found her purpose, reconnected with her family, and discovered that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Richard had left her everything, thinking he was giving her the means to live independently. What he had actually given her was the power to make sure that no other woman would have to suffer the way she had suffered. 6 months after that celebration dinner, Jasmine received a call that would change her life once again. "Ms. Whitmore? This is Senator Patricia Williams from the state legislature. I've been following the work of Hope House Foundation, and I'm wondering if you might be interested in testifying before our Committee on Domestic Violence Prevention." Jasmine's heart raced. "What kind of testimony?" "We're working on legislation that would make it easier to prosecute people who create false evidence against domestic abuse victims. Your story and the work you're doing with Hope House could be crucial in helping us pass this law." 3 weeks later, Jasmine found herself sitting at a table in the state capitol, facing a room full of legislators and reporters. She had never spoken publicly about her experience before, but she knew this was important. "My name is Jasmine Whitmore," she began, her voice steady and clear. 2 years ago, I was trapped in an abusive marriage with a man who controlled every aspect of my life. When I finally found the courage to leave him, he launched a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation and my future. She went on to describe Richard's abuse, his lies, and the fake evidence he had created. She talked about the months she had spent living in poverty while everyone believed she was a criminal. And she talked about the dozens of women Hope House had helped who were facing similar situations. Abusers don't just hurt their victims physically and emotionally, she testified. They attack their credibility, their sanity, and their ability to rebuild their lives. We need laws that recognize this pattern and make it easier to expose these tactics. The legislation passed unanimously 6 months later. It became known as the Truth and Accountability Act, and it made creating false evidence against domestic abuse victims a felony offense. On the day the law went into effect, Jasmine stood once again in the foyer of Hope House, but this time she wasn't alone. The space was filled with women whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. Rebecca was there with her teenage daughter, both of them healthy and happy in their new life. There were lawyers and social workers and police officers who had been trained to recognize the tactics abusers used to discredit their victims. And in the back of the room, barely visible among the crowd, stood a familiar figure. Helen Whitmore looked older and more frail than ever, but she was there. After the formal ceremony, Helen approached Jasmine hesitantly. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I was so blinded by grief and anger that I couldn't see the truth about my son. I know now that everything you said about Richard was true." Jasmine felt a wave of compassion for the older woman. "Helen, I know you loved him. That doesn't make what he did right, but I understand why it was hard for you to accept. I wasted 2 years fighting you instead of mourning him properly," Helen said, tears in her eyes. "I let my anger consume me, and I made your suffering worse when I should have been supporting you. You're here now," Jasmine said gently. "That's what matters." Helen reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a check for $1 million. It's money from Richard's life insurance policy that I inherited. I want Hope House to have it." Jasmine was stunned. "Helen, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. It's the only way I can think of to honor the son I thought I knew while also supporting the work you're doing to prevent other women from going through what you went through." That evening, as Jasmine sat in her office, the same room where Richard had once planned her destruction, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a victim, become a survivor, and transformed into someone who could help other women find their own strength. She had taken Richard's attempt to control her even in death and turned it into a force for liberation and healing. The phone on her desk rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was the night intake line for Hope House's emergency assistance program. "Hope House Foundation, this is Jasmine." "Is this really Jasmine Whitmore? The woman from the news?" "Yes, it is. How can I help you?" "My name is Maria, and I think my husband is trying to frame me for things I didn't do. I saw your story and I was hoping maybe you could help me too." Jasmine smiled and reached for a notepad. "Maria, you called the right place. Let me tell you about Hope House and then you can tell me your story. We're going to figure this out together." As she listened to another woman's tale of abuse and manipulation, Jasmine felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had found her true calling. Richard had tried to write the ending to her story, but she had taken the pen from his hands and written a completely different conclusion. She had not just survived, she had thrived. And in thriving, she had created a legacy that would help other women do the same for generations to come. Outside her office window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was hopeful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women to help, new battles to fight against the forces that tried to keep women trapped and silent. But tonight, Jasmine Whitmore sat in her office in the mansion that had once been her prison, now transformed into a beacon of hope for women everywhere, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had won the most important victory of all. She had won back her life, her voice, and her power to make a difference in the world. And that was the sweetest revenge imaginable.